It talks a lot about penises and feces and things like that. Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today I am going to talk about all the books that I have read in 2020 so far. Pardon my hair, I have just taken a shower and I am having my coffee. It is currently Monday morning before work and I don't know why I'm doing this now. Anyway, I have not read many books in 2020. I think the total books I've read in 2020 is 15 and that's it, which is not a lot. The first book I read this year is The 7.5 Death of Evelyn Hardcastle. I went in this book having completely forgotten what was on the summary of it, and it was kind of a nice surprise. So we follow the point of view of a man who doesn't remember anything. He wakes up in the forest somewhere. He runs in some direction trying to find some help. He ends up at an estate called the Blackheath Manor, and he's told that he's one of the guests there. Later on, he meets Evelyn Hardcastle, who is the daughter of the owners of the estate, and she is there because I believe that they're having a birthday party for her or some sort of party for her, I'm not sure. She dies at the end of the day, and the guy we follow, whose name is Aidan Bishop, is unable to save her. He wakes up the next day in a different body and realizes slowly that every single day the day starts over again from the beginning, except he's a different guest. He understands that he's meant to try and find the killer of Evelyn Hardcastle and figure out who he is, and he only has so many hosts until it's over. I rated this book 5 stars, which now that I've had a little bit more time to think over it, I would say maybe I would take 1 star off or give it 4/4.5 stars, because originally I found it really slow and really hard to get into. It was well written enough that I wanted to continue, but not much happened at the beginning. It was very slow, I didn't really understand much, and then past a certain point in the book, which is quite far off, I would say like 50 to 75% in, so really far into the book, everything starts accelerating, the pace goes much faster, we get like an acceleration of everything towards the climax, and by the end of the book I felt breathless. I was so impressed by the end of the book that I suddenly was like, this is a 5-star read, even though at the beginning I found it so hard and I would have maybe given it 3. So it went from 3 stars to 5 stars just from the ending for me. And you can really tell how much work went into crafting this book, because there are so many details that the author must have paid attention to in order for it to make sense, to have a certain chronological order, it all interlocked together, and it was all just so perfectly crafted. The amount of work and detail that must have gone into it just impressed me so much that I think solely for that reason I wanted to give it 5 stars. Okay, the next book that I read is One of Us is Next by Karen McManus. So this book is the sequel to One of Us is Lying. If you've not read One of Us is Lying, basically it is kind of Breakfast Club but with murder. So a bunch of kids, all from different parts of high school, like you have a jock, you have a princess type, you have the really smart kids, etc. All of them find themselves in detention, and one of them during detention dies, and then it turns out that it wasn't an accident, it was foul play, and they have to figure out who did it, and you have the point of view of all of them, and you're wondering who is lying, because the title is literally One of Us is Lying, and is one of them the killer, or is it an external killer somehow? And it's kind of I thought it was a really fun read, I really loved it. It's a YA thriller book. One of Us is Next is actually following the little sister of one of the main characters from the previous book, so it's not actually really a sequel, it's another character and it's their own story. What's nice is you do have some follow-up to what happened to the characters in One of Us is Lying, so you do have like a little bit of, oh, what's going on with them now that they're at uni, etc., because they were in the last year of high school in the previous book, and this time you follow the little sister of one of them. So in this book, some mysterious character is playing a game of truth or dare by phone and texting people and saying truth or dare, and if they don't respond, then he will reveal some piece of information about them that they most definitely do not want out there for everyone to know. So you have about 3, I think, main characters and point of views in the book, from what I remember, and they become the targets of this game, and their lives are about to be changed by whatever piece of gossip is about to be thrown out there by the villain, and so they want to figure out who it is and stop the person, because the dares are starting to become deadly. And one of them does it and dies from it, so that's when it becomes really serious, and they're like, we need to catch this guy because he's now become a killer. I rated it 5 stars, mostly for pure entertainment value. I just really enjoyed it. I read it super fast, and that's kind of all I want in a book. I don't particularly seek really deep, dark topics or whatever. I just like a book that makes me feel entertained the entire time and makes me forget about the real world. So the next book I read was The Hand on the Wall by Maureen Johnson. This is the 3rd book in a series called Truly Devious. So you have Truly Devious, then The Vanishing Stare, and then The Hand on the Wall. So I would just say that the main story of Truly Devious is this girl, Stevie, who is accepted by some prestigious academy where only special kind of kids are accepted because they need to have some really important topic in their lives that is taking over and making them into almost a genius. So you have like a kid who's already written a first book that's been published, and so he's considered a genius in that aspect. There's like a kid who has her own podcast or something. She's got like a big following. There's like a kid who's doing a lot of acting stunts and things like that on YouTube and in a show, and he's got his own channel, he's like a big celebrity. And then you have Stevie, who considers herself to be a detective because she's passionate about solving crime, she's really good at it, and she's kind of that character that a lot of people I think would relate to because she listens to murder podcasts and things like that, and it's just really fun to follow her. I quite like her main character point of view. So the reason that she wants to join the Ellingham Academy is because a long time ago, I can't remember when, a murder happened. The founder of the academy, his wife and his baby girl got kidnapped, and there's rumors of a big reward to be given to anyone who finds out whether Alice, the daughter, is actually still alive or not. A lot of rumors say that she is, and if people find her, then they could get a lot of money. So there's a lot of people who have tried to solve this murder in the past, and Stevie thinks that maybe she can. However, some other stuff happens at the academy, some of the kids die, and she's got to solve the present murders as well. I'm not going to say much more about it because I think you really need to read the first and the second book before you read this one. I think I rated it 4 stars. I did really enjoy it. I liked that book as the conclusion for the trilogy. I would say I loved the twists, the murder mystery, the solving of it, the detective work, the main character, and I hated the romance. That's like the main thing I really just didn't like. Trying not to give a spoiler, but basically the main romantic interest at some point treats her like shit, and we kind of forgive him without needing a real apology for it, and I kind of hated that. I was like, if it was me, I would be out of here and you would not be my main romantic interest anymore. Like, that's it. But anyway, the next book I read was D.O.G.S by M.A. Bennett, which is also a sequel. It's the sequel to Stags. In Stags, the main character basically finds herself to be the victim of a bunch of bullies in her new prestigious school. They call themselves the Medievals because they don't have phones, they don't have any technology of any sort, and they're making it cool in school not to have any of that. She is invited by the coolest and the hottest of all the guys to his estate. There's a lot of estates in all the books I've read. There's a lot of prestigious establishments or whatever. She is invited by this guy to go to his parents' estate or whatever, and when she arrives with a bunch of other kids, she realizes all the kids that were invited on top of the Medievals are the most uncool and the most bullied kids in school, and she realizes that something is very off, and all of the games that are happening at the manor, hunting, shooting and fishing, those blood sports are more dark and twisted than she thought, and that the people that are actually being hunted might very well be the misfits that were all invited to the manor. So D.O.G.S is the second book in this, and it's got a bit of a different story because we do have the same main character and she's still in school and there's still more shenanigans happening, but it isn't about the same villain or the same mystery to solve or whatever. I gave D.O.G.S 5 stars. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was such a clever new story to have with the main character still there and still kind of somehow following up to some of the mysteries we had in the first book. So I really enjoyed that. And the cast of characters is really fun to continue reading about. Next I read We Have Always Lived in the Castle by Shirley Jackson. I rated it 4 star. We follow the point of view of Mary Catherine Blackwood, who lives with her sister Constance. She talks and acts a lot like a child even though she's 18 years old, and you discover slowly that something has happened where her entire family got poisoned at some point, and a lot of people in the village that they live in think that Constance, her older sister, was the one who did it and was guilty, except that she was exonerated and was considered not guilty by a court or something. And it is a kind of dark psychological thriller in a way as you delve deeper into a bit of a crazy mind. I don't really know what else to say without giving spoilers. I thought it was brilliantly written. It was very dark though and kind of depressing, and I think you kind of guess at some point what's going to happen. It isn't that much of a surprise when you figure out the ending. So I rated it 4 stars. It was overall a really good book and a really good read, but I wouldn't call it enjoyable because it was very dark and depressing, and I don't often like reading that kind of stuff. The next book I read was The Darkest Part of the Forest by Holly Black. I have never read another book by Holly Black before, and I gotta say I really enjoyed this one. It's a standalone YA fantasy novel where we follow the adventures of Hazel, who is a young girl who lives with her brother Ben in a town called Fairfold, where humans and fae coexist together peacefully, and they know of the existence of fae. So it's kind of like, you feel like it's the normal world, but except that there's that twist where they live in a town where fae exist and people know about it, but the rest of the world doesn't seem to think they really exist, so it could almost exist in our world, if that makes sense. Hazel has always been fascinated by this glass coffin in the middle of the woods that holds the body of a fae boy, and he's never woken up, and both Hazel and her brother Ben were in love with him when they were children, and the boy has pretty much been there forever, sleeping for generations. Except one day they find the coffin broken and empty. I rated it 5 stars. I hadn't never read another book by Holly Black before, so I have no idea what her other books are like. I think she's quite a famous fantasy author, but I generally really enjoyed this one. The main character was so cool and badass, but also vulnerable at the same time, and I really liked it. I thought it was brilliantly written, just really fun, light-hearted, but also covered a lot of topics about friendship and family and love and things that I just thought were greatly wrapped up in this book. Next I read The Fox's Curse, which is number 3 in the series Crow Investigations by Sarah Painter. In the very first book, to tell you about the series in general, you follow the adventures of Lydia Crow, who is part of the Crow family. In London there are several families: the Crows, the Pearls, the Foxes maybe, and the Silvers, who all have a certain type of power associated with them and kind of are like mafia families almost, owning parts of London, but the magical part that people don't know about, and they have some sort of power over people. For instance, people of the Pearl family are excellent at selling absolutely anything, and if you pass by one of their shops you might very well be like, I need to buy this, and you don't really need to. So that's the kind of powers that they hold. Lydia Crow is a private investigator. She thinks she has absolutely no power, but obviously she might still have some hints of a power that she just doesn't want anything to do with. She comes back to London and hopes to start her investigation business there. Her family ends up calling her for a favour and asks for her to help figure out what happened to her cousin Maddie, who disappeared. So that's kind of the main story. I really enjoy the series overall, and I might still read the 4th one that came out recently, but I only rated this book, The Fox's Curse, I think 2 stars, mainly because out of all the books, this is one where the main character just cannot catch a break. She just has bad stuff happening to her and people knowing more than her and gets beaten up by people and gets told off by other people non-fucking stop, and it's just like there's not a single time that you think, wow, that's a small victory. And I think that's why I rated it so low, because I just need to have some sort of victory to be like, yay, she got one, she finally, you know, the tables have turned or whatever, and you just don't have any moment like that in the book whatsoever. So I was just really disappointed by it. But it is part of a series and it wasn't the last book either, so maybe it was all to set up that kind of victories and things like that in the next book, so I probably will still read the 4th book in the series. After that I read Meddling Kids by Edgar Cantero, and I rated it 4 stars. This is a kind of Scooby-Doo gang type of story, but much darker and more horror based, where we have these 4 people and a dog who, when they were children, used to be the detective gang, and they would solve crime in their little hometown, and they actually did solve like a serious crime at some point. So all the kids are grown up now, and it's 1990, and when they solved their last case together it was 1977, but all of them were kind of traumatized by that last case, and then they figure out. It's a little bit like in Scooby-Doo, where you have the villains are always hiding behind monsters' masks, and then you always discover it's not real, they weren't really monsters, they were all along a human being hiding behind a mask. So they solve a case in 1977 where it's exactly that, that's what happens, and they figure out this is the man behind it, and they put him in jail. But then years later you follow some of the characters from this gang, and they seem to think that maybe they were wrong, and maybe the man who did it wasn't actually the real villain, and that there are real monsters and real horrific things happening on that lake where they solved that murder. I thought it was a really good, fun read. It was completely different from anything I've read, and I really enjoyed it. It felt really inspired by those horror pulp books from the 70s or whatever, and I kind of really liked that. I thought it was really refreshing. I gave it 4 stars and overall quite enjoyed it. Next I read Polaris Rising, Aurora Blazing and Chaos Reigning by Jessie Mihalik, which are all 3 books in a trilogy that she wrote. I'm gonna summarize it by space princesses and outlaws. So in Polaris Rising we have a space princess who is on the run from a forced marriage, and she's caught by this mercenary ship because they want to bring her back to her family and collect the reward. But she's thrown in the same cell as the most dangerous outlaw in the fucking galaxy or something like that, who also happens to be extremely hot. So it was a bit steamy but not overly so. It was very fun, very fast-paced, action-packed, and also you can tell that the author really did her research in terms of technical terms and sci-fi things happening, and I was very lost in a lot of cases, and I was like, I do not know what that means, but okay, I believe you. It is sci-fi, it is in space, I believe that. So it felt very realistic in a way, and very well written and very well done. I enjoyed all 3 books. I think I gave the first 2 5 stars and the last one 4 stars, just because it felt a little bit more like the 3rd one. The character was melting in with the first 2 and didn't feel as much as her own person as the other 2, because each book followed a different space princess. They're all sisters and they're all from the same family, and they all find themselves in some kind of trouble, and there's always some hot guy there to help. Next I read John Dies at the End by David Wong. I have put it up in my July wrap-up / small August TBR video, so I've already explained how I feel about this book. Basically you follow the adventures of this guy David and his best friend John, who take some sort of weird drug called the Soitos that allows them to access some part of their brain where they're able to see a bunch of shit, including real life monsters, and they kind of make a business out of getting rid of these monsters. And it's very strange, very fun in some ways, and has a lot of weird dark humor at all times. It talks a lot about penises and feces and things like that. I overall enjoyed it, but it took me a really long time to finish it, so I rated it 3 stars, and I think it was for 3.5 stars. Next I read The Guest List by Lucy Foley, which I also talked about in that video. This is an adult thriller. She wrote The Hunting Party, and the guest list follows a similar type of story where we have a cast of people that all stuck together on some island because this rich fancy couple decided to get married on this faraway island in Northern Ireland, I think. And there's a storm coming, so they're going to be stuck there. And then we have the present tense where we have something has happened and we kind of figure out there's a dead body and someone was killed. And then we have the past tense where a couple of days or a day before this happened, you follow the different point of views of different characters who are all invited at the wedding, including the bride is also one of the point of views. You have to kind of figure out who the victim is and who the killer is, and I kind of enjoyed that formula. I think it was quite well written and fun to read. There was some unrealistic plot twist towards the end where I think a lot of characters were linked in a way to the main victim, but that just felt like overkill. Like everyone was linked to the victim somehow, and I was just like, that doesn't feel realistic at all, because these people do not know each other and aren't meant to be in the same circle of people. They're just brought together by this wedding, but realistically they shouldn't all have some weird past linked to this victim. Apart from that, I did enjoy the book, so I did rate it 4 stars. Next, I read These Witches Don't Burn by Isabel Sterling. I talk about it in my vlog. I overall enjoyed the book, but felt like it was a bit on the younger side than the adult side of the YA spectrum. It is a YA contemporary fantasy that follows the adventures of Hannah, who's an elemental witch living in Salem, where she has to hide her powers, and she's part of a clan of witches that are all very careful about showing their powers to regs, aka regular people. I rated it, I think 3.5 stars. I kind of enjoyed it, but it was more on the middle range for me. Next, I read Humble Pie, A Comedy of Mouth Error by Matt Parker. Same, I also vlogged about it in my last video. I kind of enjoyed some bits about this book, but not everything, and there were some bits that I found really boring and slow. It is a non-fiction book telling different stories about how people have made mistakes in the history of the world using math, engineering and things like that. So I rated it 3 stars, and that's the last book that I read in 2020. That's it, that concludes this video. I only read 15 books in total. I'm hoping that I'm going to be able to get back onto my Goodreads challenge and read as many books as possible this month so that I can be back on track. I will see you guys next time in another video. Bye!